So we're looking at a pretty compelling case for a price run on silver over the coming months, and there's a way to take advantage of that. It just might not be what you're thinking because 96 times out of 100, it doesn't happen the way they say. We're going to make a quick case for silver, and you'll either think that I'm making a case for it or against it based on how you think of the metal. Now, to be clear, I'm making a case for it. I'll even point out an easy way to take advantage of that. But if there's one thing that I've learned here, it's that being interested in silver or even being a fan of silver isn't enough. I found that out in August of 2020 when I gave my 12-month prediction for silver price. Now you need some context here. Silver had just run up to $29 and there were some frothy predictions being thrown out. One of the people in the community, far more popular than me, had just said three-figure silver in the next 12 months was a no-brainer. His mark was $150. I disagreed. Long story short, I was asked what I thought the price of silver would be in 12 months, and I said $29. Now this, of course, was not a popular answer, and I tried to explain it at the time, but it was probably lost in all the angry keyboard typing. Now, I didn't just say it. I wasn't trolling. I sold most of my physical silver that I had that same month. I bought a small amount of gold in a swap. I bought a small amount of SLV, and I put the rest into Bitcoin and ETH. Now, I wasn't trying to convince anyone to do the same, but I tried to explain why I did it at the time. And mostly it had to do with the aspects of gold and silver that just don't line up with each other. Gold being a reserve asset, silver having industrial importance. Now, this was at a time when the industry was more or less being shut down. Another part of this, though, was that I remembered the last run-up for silver, and I was holding the bag on some of that for 9 years at that point, and $30 was my exit number. And no big surprise here, but nobody wanted to hear that at the time. There's a sizable contingent telling me in the comments that I was going to be sorry. Well, 3 years later, the end of 2023, last year, I started buying a little bit again. And that's my recent history with it. I say this because I think it's easy to just say what I think here, but the conviction can really only be seen in what you actually do. And a really important part in all of this is that I was buying gold throughout that period of time. And again, this is not a question of whether you should buy silver. It's a question of if or when you should buy silver instead of gold. Again, which is the better buy. Now, I've been choosing gold, but at the end of 2023, last year, silver was at the tail end of a losing year with spot price actually decreasing 0.5%. And more important than that, dealers had scaled way back on premiums, particularly on American Silver Eagles, which is what I was buying. Now, the other silver that I was buying was SLV, the iShares Silver Trust ETF. Now, why not PSLV? I see that in the comments anytime I mention ETFs. Well, I never intend to take physical delivery of the silver, with the minimum redemption for PSLV being 10 1,000-ounce bars. Look, I'm just never going to want 10,000 ounces of physical silver, so it just doesn't matter to me. That point is moot. It's also surprisingly contentious, but everything that I've said up to now is just to give a little bit of background on what I'm doing. So if you don't agree with what I did or what I'm doing, at least now we're all clear on what that was and is. So now we can get to it. What's changed? Well, not much and everything. It just depends on your angle. The reason that I'm buying silver again is that I see potential as a trade. The reason I'm buying physical, or at least a small amount of it anyway, is that I think it also has a decent base case as well, at least now that the premiums have come down. And that spot price still lagging, that's good for both of those cases. The reason I'm talking about it at all, though, is that one argument for a breakout price in silver finally seems feasible. And that argument, in a nutshell, is that a strong dollar depresses silver price and a weakening dollar sends it up. The same is true for gold, of course, but silver may be more sensitive to it. Now, the case for a weakening dollar, that isn't even something I have to make a case for around here. The dollar strength and bond yields, they have a lot to do with the federal funds rate, which is about to be cut. That isn't new news, and some of that's already priced in the gold and silver markets. But if we just compared silver to gold since August of 2020, the date that I originally started out talking about when I sold most of mine, well, silver is still just below $30, and that means that it's lagging gold by 25% in that same time frame. So for silver to catch up with gold, a 25% run would put it at $37.50. That's if gold stood still. Nothing crazy. No, if gold were to make a similar 25% run starting today, it would need to shoot to $3,150. So to me, the case for silver making a 25% run on today's prices is stronger than gold doing the same thing. That's on the catalyst of an actual rate cut, something that's finally right around the corner. Now, I'm going to show some charts in a minute, but before we do, some would say a 25% gain for silver taking it to $37.50. Well, it's just not exciting. Those are rookie numbers, and maybe they're even right. Silver has been as high as $48 before. That was 13 years ago, but why couldn't it go there again? And just for the sake of working through possibilities, I don't see any reason silver couldn't run another 60%. That would bring it back to its past all-time high, and maybe a shift in Fed rate policy and a falling dollar could actually get it there. Okay, so maybe it's a good time to take a breath here and explain an asterisk behind all of this. I've now said silver probably is more likely than gold to jump another 25%. I've said I don't see any reason why it couldn't actually run 60%. That's over the short term, who knows? Now, I'm not personally making those cases, but my warning lights don't go off when I hear something like that until somebody says silver is a better buy than gold. Something people were definitely saying in August of 2020 and something they've been saying all along. Charts tell us hasn't been the case, but now we have an actual catalyst with the Fed rate cut that's going to affect both gold and silver, and there's at least a strong chance it's going to have more impact on silver because gold may have gotten a head start. So let's get into the charts. If we're saying silver can feasibly make a 60% run to recapture that $48 all-time high, we need to look at what happened the last time it hit that level because, yeah, it gave it all up, and 13 years later, we're still waiting for that lightning to strike again. So if I'm deciding between gold and silver, deciding which is the better buy, I have to decide if I'm buying it as a long-term hold or as a trade. Now, if we want to compare the two, gold and silver, we need to switch the chart. And this comparison shows us there are points where silver would have been the better trade, but there's only one point on this chart if we're looking at them as a long-term hold. It's at the end here. Gold is in yellow, of course. Silver's in gray. Well, the takeaway here is that silver has a base case and a speculative case. So if you're buying physical silver or you're deciding which is the better buy, physical gold or physical silver, you should be looking at the base case. Unless you have a crystal ball telling you when a spike is coming, so you know when to come in, and telling you when a spike is ending, so you know when to get out. So this is a 53-year comparison here. If you timed your entrance perfect, you got in right here, and you got out right here, well, you nailed it. But if you didn't, the comparison looks a lot different. So what these charts tell us is we need to be careful of people giving a case for silver's potential as a trade, but telling us to buy physical silver as a long-term hold. Now, we've seen silver make two big runs in 50 years, at least some of us have. I think the stats tell me there are a lot of us here who haven't been alive that long, but we've also seen those two runs crash. And what that means is taking advantage of those two price runs would have meant selling. And that's a lot easier said than done if the silver you have weighs 60 pounds and requires a gorilla cart to transport. Now, if we pull up a chart for gold, you will see pullbacks as well. This is not labeled well, but it's a very different case than silver. We don't need to make up a story for it to be a smart buy based on tight windows of time. So if the question is whether silver is a better buy than gold right now, I would say we might be coming into one of those uncommon cases where silver price could actually outperform gold over the next few months. And by a fair margin even, that's a lot more rare, but it's still possible. It's definitely a more interesting trade to me right now if we're talking about markets, trading something like an ETF. But the important factor is that you would have to be willing to sell at the right time if and when it hits. Now, if we're talking about physical metals, though, something we intend to hold for the long term, and really on this channel and others like it, we are, a few months of inverted performance is not going to change much for me. We have the charts, we know the premiums, the logistics of storing, the logistics of selling. None of that has changed for me. So I'll buy a little bit of physical silver and I'll have something easier to trade. Remember, this is not a question of whether it makes sense to buy silver. It's a question of whether it makes sense to buy silver instead of gold. In history, it shows that silver can make these big runs. We saw two breakout points where silver definitely outperformed gold convincingly. So we know it can make those big runs, but we also know if we want to take advantage of that extra potential in silver's performance, we have to move. So let others say whatever they want, but I definitely wouldn't say silver's the better buy right now just because it might be a better trade. So let's call it good there. Let us know what you think. Am I wrong here? We're talking about silver, so I probably am. Just let it rip. And while you're in the comments, be sure to hit that like button if you found any of this interesting. Be sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on if you want to hear more on the topic. And if you're still here, thanks again for watching. I always appreciate your time. Take care.